What's up, YouTube people? Shaggy the Writer coming at you live and direct from the library. Everything is as it should be, I guess. Trying to get over my funk because a website said I was supposed to have a phone interview today, and it turned out to be an in-person interview, but they haven't updated their website, so it's my fault. No, I can't say that because it's actually a place I would really love to work for if I got the chance. And you know how websites be. So, shouts out to Continue. He's just Continue now. There is no more Don't Watch in his name. You can go search for Continue. He makes his beats live. He's currently over there asking for input now. Shouts out to Against the World G. Shouts out to Rakim.
Ladies and gentlemen, when I make a beat, I always take my time. I'm not gonna rush a beat. Take the time. Time is quality. Don't you agree? Magic? Yeah, man. Of course. Take your time. Right. Sometimes I take a year over a beat to make it sound real perfect. Because when I make beats, I want to make it sound perfect.
They over here having a whole in-depth conversation about beats.
Maybe longer.
It's very good. But anyway, yes, shouts out to Continue and Deadline. Shouts out to Against the World G. Shouts out to the fine staff over at the Anderson Library. They're very fine over here, doing a great job keeping this place spotless and letting people come in here and do creative stuff on a regular basis. Is very cool. Shouts out to your boy over here. I need some love. Give me thumbs up. I need some thumbs up. I see y'all showing up. Here's a book that I'm excited to read, even though I won't be able to pronounce any of the names correctly. I guess it's Virgo season. I'll have a whole bunch more shout outs in a moment, but you know how we do shout outs, chat acknowledgments, etc. will be at the chapter breaks. A brilliant career lay before Eugene Innerbeck. He had everything necessary to attain an admirable education at home, high honors when he graduated in law at Petersburg University, and connections in the highest society through his recently deceased father. He had also begun the service of one of the ministries under protection of the minister. However, he had a fortune, even a large one, though insecure. His father had lived abroad and in Petersburg, allowing his sons Eugene and Andrew. Andrew was older than Eugene in the Horse Guards. 6,000 rubles each year, while he himself and his wife spent a great deal. He only used to visit his estate for a couple months in the summer and did not concern himself with its direction, entrusting it all to an unscrupulous manager who also failed to attend to it, but in whom he had complete confidence. After the father's death, when the brothers began to divide the property, so many debts were discovered that their lawyer even advised them to refuse the inheritance and retain only a small estate left to them by their grandmother, which was valued at 100,000 rubles. But a neighboring landed proprietor who had done business with old Incheryev, that is to say, who had promissory notes for him, had come to Petersburg on that account, said that in spite of the debts they could straighten out affairs so as to retain a large fortune. It would only be necessary to sell the forest and some outlying land, retaining the rich Semenov estate with 4,000 yestins of black earth, the sugar factory, and 200 yestins of water meadows. If one devoted himself to the management of the estate, settled there, and farmed it wisely and economically. And so, having visited the estate in spring, his father had died in Lent. Eugene looked into everything, resolved to retire from the civil service, settle in the country with his mother, and undertake the management with the object of preserving the main estate. He arranged with his brother, with whom he was very friendly, that he would pay him either 4,000 rubles a year or a lump sum of 80,000, for which Andrew would hand over his share of the inheritance. So he arranged matters, and having settled down with his mother in the big house, began managing the estate eagerly yet cautiously. It is generally supposed that conservatives are usually old people, and that those in favor of change are usually young. That is not quite correct. Usually conservatives are young people, those who want to live, but do not want to think about how to live, and have not time to think, and therefore take as a model for themselves a way of life that they have seen. Thus it was for Eugene, having settled in the village as his aim and ideal was to restore the form of life that had existed, not in his father's time. His father had been a bad manager, but in his grandfather's. And now he tried to resurrect the general spirit of his grandfather's life, in the house, the garden, and in the estate management, of course with changes suited to the times, everything on a large scale, good order, method, and everybody satisfied. But to do this entitled much work. It was necessary to meet the demands of the creditors and the banks, and for that purpose sell some land and arrange renewals of credit. It was necessary to get money to carry on, partly by farming out land and partly by hiring labor, the immense operations on the Semenov estate with its 400 destins of plowland and its sugar factory, and to deal with the garden so that it should not seem to be neglected or in decay. There was much work to do, but Eugene had plenty of strength, physical and mental. He was 26, of medium height, strongly built, with muscles developed by gymnastics. He was full-blooded, and his whole neck was very red. His teeth and lips were bright. His hair was soft and curly, though not thick. His only physical deficit was his short-sightedness, which he himself developed by using spectacles, so that he could not now do without pince-nez, which he had already formed a little line on the bridge of his nose. Such he was physically. For his spiritual portrait it might be said that the better people knew him, the better they liked him. His mother had always loved him more than anyone else, and now, after her husband's death, she concentrated on him, not only her whole affection, but her whole life. Nor was it only his mother who loved him so. All his comrades in the high school and the university merely liked him very much, but respected him as well. He had this effect on all who met him. It was impossible not to believe what he said, impossible to suspect any detection or deception or falseness in one who had such an open, honest face, and particular such eyes. In general, his personality helped him much in his affairs. The creditor who would have refused another trusting, the clerk, the village elder. Oh my God, guys. I might be turning off continue here in a moment. You talking to us, not. ah, but anyway. In general, his personality helped him in much in his affairs. A creditor who would have refused another trusted him. The clerk, the village elder, or a peasant who would have played a dirty trick and cheated someone else, forgot to deceive under the pleasant impression of intercourse with this kindly, agreeable, and above all candid person. It was the end of May. Eugene had somehow managed in town to get vacant land freed from the mortgage, so as to sell it to the merchant, and had borrowed money from the same merchant to replenish his stock, that is to say, to procure horses, bulls, and carts, and in particular begin to build necessary farmhouse. The men had been arranged. Timber was being carted, and the carpenters were already at work, and the manure for the estate was being brought on 80 carts, but everything still hung by a thread. Amid these cares something came about through which unimportant tormented Eugene at the time. As a young man, he lived as a healthy young man lived. That is, he was not a libertine neither, as he seldom said, but he had relations with women with various kinds. He himself would call himself a monk. He only turned to this, however, in so far as was necessary for physical health and to have a free mind, as he used to say. This had begun when he was 16 and had gone on satisfactorily, in the sense that he had never given himself up to debauchery, never once been infatuated, and never contracted any disease. At first he had a seamstress in Petersburg, and then she got spoiled, and he made other arrangements. But that side of his affairs was made so well secured that it did not trouble him. But now he was living in the country for the second month and did not at all know what he was to do. Compulsory and self-restraint was beginning to have a bad effect on him. Must he really go to town for that purpose? And where to? How? That was the only thing that disturbed him. But as he was convinced that the thing was necessary and that he needed it, it really became a necessity, and he felt that he was not free, and that his eyes involuntarily followed every young woman. He did not approve of having relations with a married woman or a maid in his own village. He knew by rapport that both his father and grandfather had been quite different in this matter from other landowners of that time. At home they had never had any entanglements with peasant women, and he had decided that he would not do so either. But afterwards, feeling himself ever more and more under compulsion, and imagining what horror might reflect to him in the neighboring country town, to reflect on him that the days of serfdom were now over, he decided that it might be done on the spot. Only it must be done so that no one should know of it, and not for the sake of debauchery, but merely for health's sake, as he said to himself. And when he had decided that this, he still became more restless. When talking to the village elder, the peasants, or the carpenters, he involuntarily brought the conversation round to women. And when it turned to women, he kept it on that theme. He noticed the women more and more. Oh god, this guy's gonna get really bad here really soon, I can feel it. Chapter 3. To settle this matter on his own mind was one thing, to carry it out was another. To approach a woman himself was impossible. Which one, where? It must be done through someone else. But whom should he speak about it? It happened to go into the watchman's hut in the forest to get a drink of water. The watchman had been his father's huntsman, and Eugene Ivanovitch chanted with him. And the man began telling some strange tales of hunting sprees. It occurred to Eugene Ivanovitch that it would be convenient to arrange matters in this hut, or in the wood, where he did not know how to manage it, or whether old Daniel would undertake the arrangement. Perhaps he would be horrified at such a proposal. I shall have disgraced myself, but perhaps he will agree to do it quite simply. So he thought while listening to Daniel's stories. Daniel was telling how once, when he had been stopping at the hut of a sexton's wife in an outlying field, he had brought a woman for Fyodor Zakhariev Piranishkinov. It will be all right, thought Eugene. Your father, may the kingdom of heaven be his, did not go in for nonsense of that kind. It won't do, thought Eugene, but to test the matter, he said, how was it you engaged on such bad things? Oh, but what there bad was in it? She was glad. Fyodor Zechariah was satisfied, very satisfied. I got a rouble. Why, what did he do? Too lively little limb apparently, and drinks wine. Yes, I may speak, thought Eugene, and at once proceeded to do so. And you know, Daniel, I do not know how to endure it. He felt himself going scarlet. Daniel smiled. I am not a monk. I have been accustomed to it. He felt that what he was saying was stupid, but glad to see that Daniel approved. Why, of course, you should have told me a long time ago. It can all be arranged, said he. Only tell me which one you want. Oh, it is really all the same to me. Of course, no one ugly, and she must be healthy. I understand, said Daniel briefly. He reflected. Ah, there is a tasty morsel, he began. Again Eugene went red. A tasty morsel. See, here she was married last autumn, Daniel whispered, and she hasn't been able to do anything. Think what that is worth to one who wants it. Eugene even frowned with shame. No, no, he said. I don't want that at all. I want, on the contrary. What would the contrary be? On the contrary, I only want that she should be healthy, and that there should be as little fuss as possible. Oh, I knew it was getting bad. A woman whose husband is away in the army or something of the kind. That as little fuss as possible line. Let's just be glad we don't live in the 18th, 19th century, the late 19th century. 1888 does not seem like a cool place to be. I know, the panda I must bring you. Her husband is away in town, just the same as a soldier. And she was a fine woman and clean. You'll be satisfied. As it is, I was saying to her the other day, you should go, but she. Well, then, where's it to be? Tomorrow, if you like. I shall be going to get some tobacco and I will call it in. And at the dinner hour, come here, or to the bathhouse behind the kitchen garden. There nobody'll be about. Besides, after dinner, everybody takes a nap. All right, then. A terrible excitement seized Eugene as he rode home. What will happen? What is a peasant woman like? Suppose it turns out she is hideous, horrible. No, she is handsome, he told himself, remembering some he had noticed. But what shall I say? What shall I do? He was not himself all that day. The next day at noon, he went to the forester's hut. Daniel stood at the door, silently and significantly nodded towards the wood. The blood rushed to Eugene's heart. He was conscious of it and went to the kitchen garden. No one was there. He went to the bathhouse. There was no one about. He looked in, came out, and suddenly heard the crackling of a breaking twig. He looked round. She was standing in the thicket beyond a little ravine. He rushed there across the ravine. There were nettles in it which he had not noticed. They stung him, and losing the pince nez from his nose, he ran up the slope on the farther side. She stood there in a white embroidered apron, a brown skirt, and brought a red handkerchief, barefoot, fresh, firm, and handsome, and smiling shyly. Uh, Sorry, guys, you're getting turned down. uh, There is a path leading round. You should have gone round, she said. What came long ago, ever so long. He went up to her and looking over her touched her. Quarter of an hour they separated. He found his pince nez, called in to see Daniel, and gave in reply to his question. Ugh, are you satisfied, master? Gave him a ruble and went home. He was satisfied. Only at first he felt ashamed, but that had passed. Everything had gone well. The best thing was he now felt at ease, tranquil and vigorous. As for her, he had not even seen her thoroughly. He remembered that she was clean, fresh, not bad-looking, and simple, without any pretense. Whose wife is he? Said he to himself. Peknikov's, Daniel said. What is Peknikov? Which Peknikov is that? There are two households of that name. Probably she is Michael's daughter-in-law. Yes, that must be it. His son does live in Moscow. I'll ask Daniel about it sometime. From that onward, the previously important drawback from country life, enforced self-restraint, was limited. Eugene's freedom of mind was no longer disturbed, and he was able to attend freely to his affairs. And the matter Eugene had undertaken was far from easy. Before he had time to stop up one hole with a new one would unexpectedly show itself, and sometimes seemed to him that he would not be able to go through with it, and that it would end in his having to sell the estate after all, which would mean that all his efforts would have been wasted, and that he had failed to accomplish what he had undertaken. That prospect disturbed him most of all. All this time more and more debts of his father's unexpectedly came to light. It was evident that towards the end of his life he had borrowed right and left. At that time of the settlement in May, Eugene had thought he at least knew everything, But in the middle of the summer he suddenly received a letter from which it appeared that there was a debt of 12,000 rubles to the widow Espiovia. No. There was no promissory note, but only an ordinary receipt which his lawyer had told him could be disputed. It did not enter Eugene's head to refuse to pay a debt of his father's merely because the document could be challenged. He only wanted to know for certain whether there had been such a debt. "Mamma, who is Katerina Vladimirovna Espiovia?" he asked his mother when they met as usual for dinner. "Espiovia. She was brought up by your grandfather. Why?" Eugene told his mother about the letter. "I wonder she is not ashamed to ask for it. Your father gave her so much." "But do we owe her this?" "Well, now, how shall I put it? It's not a debt. Papa, out of his unbounded kindness." "Yes, but did Papa consider it a debt?" "I cannot say. I do not know. I only know that it is hard enough for you without that." Eugene saw that Mary Pavlovna did not know what to say, and it was astounding to him. "Oh, we'll see. I'll see from what you say." "Oh, well, I see from what you say that it must be paid," said he. "I will go to see her tomorrow and have a chat, and see that it cannot be deferred." "Oh, how sorry I am for you! But no, it will be best. Tell her she must wait," said Mary Pavlovna, evidently tranquilized and proud of her son's decision. Eugene's position was particularly hard, because his mother, who was living with him, did not at all realize his position. She had been so accustomed all of her life to live extravagantly that she could not ever imagine herself in the position her son was in. That is to say that today or tomorrow matters might shape themselves so that they would have nothing left, and that he would have to sell everything and live and support his mother on what salary he could earn, which at the very most would be 2,000 rubles. She did not understand that they could only save themselves from that position by cutting down expense on everything, and so she could not understand why Eugene was so careful about trifles and expenditure on gardeners, coachmen, servants, even on food. Also, like most widows, she nourished feelings of devotion to the memory of her departed spouse quite different from those she had felt for him when they departed, and she did not admit that the thought that anything the departed had done or arranged could be wrong or could be altered. Eugene, by great efforts, managed to keep up the garden, and the conservatory with 2 gardeners, and the stables with 2 coachmen. Mary Pavlovna naively thought she was sacrificing herself for her son, and doing all a mother could do by not complaining of the food which the old man cook prepared, for the fact that the paths in the park were not swept clean, and that instead of footmen they only had a boy. So too concerning this new debt in which Eugene saw an almost crushing blow to all his underlings, Mary Pavlovna only saw an incident displaying Eugene's noble nature. Moreover, she did not feel any anxiety about Eugene's position, because she was confident that he would make a brilliant marriage which would put everything right, and he could know and he could make a very brilliant marriage. She knew a dozen families who would be glad to give their daughters to him, and she wished to arrange the matter as soon as possible. Man, shouts out, don't watch continue. Shouts out against the world, gee. Shouts out DeepMind. Shouts out the fine folks at the r/alternate history of Discord. Ah, yes. whole bunch of dope people show up to these things, and I got love for y'all. Maybe later today you'll get to see me dressed up like Joe Biden playing basketball. That's right. It'll be very, very hilarious. Very hilarious. Let me just drop a couple things here on checking. Shouts out Renzo Flutes. Shouts out Aqua Wave. Shouts out Brittany Rakim. Marie. A whole lot of people that show up to these things, and y'all are dope. So yeah, kind of waiting on an email, but worst comes down to it, I might be just sitting in here. But we've got some really good literature and good music. Compliments are doing to continue. And we already on chapter 4. That sounds fancy. It's 4. That's everything. Everything every time, motherfucker. But Eugene himself dreamt of marriage, but not in the same way as his mother. The idea of using marriage as a means of putting his affairs in order was repulsive to him. He wished to marry honorably for love. He observed the girls whom he had met, those who he knew, and compared himself with them, but no decision had yet been taken. Meanwhile, contrary to his expectations, his relations with Stepanda continued, and even acquired the character of a settled affair. Eugene was so far from debauchery, it was hard for him secretly to do this thing which he felt to be bad, but he could not arrange these meetings himself, and even after the first one hoped not to see Stepandia again. But it turned out that after some time the restlessness, do he believe that cause, overcame him again. And his restlessness this time was no longer impersonal, but suggested that those same bright black eyes and that deep voice saying, "Ever so long," in the same sense of something fresh and strong, with the same full breast lifting the bib of her apron, and all this in that hazel and maple thicket, bathed in its bright sunlight. Though he felt ashamed, he again approached Daniel, and again the rendezvous was fixed for midday in the wood. This time Eugene looked her over more carefully, and everything about her seemed attractive. He tried talking to her and asked about her husband. He really was Michael's son, and he lived as a coachman in Moscow. Well then, how is it Eugene wanted to ask, but how she was being so untrue. What's about how it? Asked she. Evidently she was clever and quick-witted. Well, how is it you come to me? There now, she said merrily. I bet he goes on a spree there, why shouldn't I? Evidently she was putting on an air of sauciness and assurance, and this seemed charming to Eugene. But all the same he did not himself fix a rendezvous with her. Even when she had proposed that they should meet without the aid of Daniel, whom she seemed not very well disposed, he did not consent. He hoped that this meeting would be the last. He liked her. He thought such intercourse was unnecessary for him, that there was nothing bad about it, but in the depth of his soul there was a stricter judge, who did not approve of it, hoped that this would be the last time, or if he did not hope that, at any rate did not wish to participate in arrangements or repeat it another time. And so the whole summer passed, during which they met a dozen times and always by Daniel's help. It happened once that she could not be there because her husband had come home, and Daniel proposed to another woman, but Eugene refused with disgust. Then the husband went away, and the meetings continued as before, at first through Daniel, but afterwards he simply fixed the time, and she came with another woman, Procovoria, as it would not do for a peasant woman to go about alone. Once at the very time fixed for a rendezvous, a family came to call on Mary Pavlovna, with the very girl she wished Eugene to marry, and it was impossible for Eugene to get away. As soon as he could do so, he went out as though the thrashing floor and round the path to meet her in the woods. She was not there, but at their accustomed spot everything within reach had been broken, the black adder, the hazel twigs, and even a young maple the thickness of a stake. She had waited, had become excited and angry, and had scarcely left him in remembrance. He waited and waited, then went to Daniel to ask him to call her for tomorrow. She came and was just as usual. So the summer passed, their meetings always arranged in the woods, and only once, when it grew towards autumn, in the shed that stood in her backyard. It did not enter Eugene's head that these relations of his had any importance for him. About her he did not even think. He gave her money and nothing more. At first he did not know and did not think that the affair was known, and that she was envied throughout the village, or that her relations took money from her and encouraged her, and that her conception of any sin in the matter had been quite obliterated by the influence of the money and her family's approval. It seemed to her that if people envied her, then she was doing good. "It is simply necessary for my health," thought Eugene. "I grant it's not right, though no one says anything. Everybody or many people know of it. The woman who comes with her knows, and once she knows it is sure that others know as well. But what's to be done? I'm acting badly," thought Eugene. "But what's one to do? Anyhow, it's not for long." What chiefly disturbed Eugene was the thought of the husband. At first, for some reason, it seemed to him that the husband must be of a poor sort.
Yeah, there we go.
Terribly timed. It seemed to him that the husband must be of poor sort, and that this was partly justified by his conduct. But he saw the husband and was struck by his appearance. He was a fine fellow and smartly dressed, in no way a worse man than himself, but surely better. At their next meeting he told her that he had seen her husband and had been surprised to see that he was a decent-looking fellow. "There's not another man like him in the village," she said proudly. This surprised Eugene, and the thought of the husband tormented him still more after that. He happened to be at Daniel's one day, and Daniel, having begun chatting, said to him quite openly, "Michael asked for me the other Michael asked for me the other day. Is it true that the master is living with my wife?" Oh, wait, my bad. "And Michael asked me the other day, is it true that the master is living with my wife? I said I don't know. Anyway, I said better with the master than with the peasants. "Well, what did he say?" "He said, wait a bit. I'll get to know and I'll give her all the same." "Yes, if the husband returned to live here, I would have to give her up," thought Eugene. But the husband lived in town, and for the present their intercourse continued. "When necessary, I will break it off, and there will be nothing left of it," thought he. And this seemed to him certain, especially as during the whole summer many different things occupied him very fully. The erection of the new farmhouse, and the harvest of building above all, the meeting of debts and selling of the waste land. All these were the affairs that completely absorbed him, and on which he spent his thoughts when he lay down and when he got up. All that was real life. His intercourse he did not even call it connection with Stipendia he paid no attention to. It is true that when the wish to see her arose, it came time with such strength that he could think of nothing else. But this didn't last long. A meeting was arranged, and he forgot her for a week or even a month. In autumn Eugene often rode to town, and there became friendly with the Anaskazi. Ana Anenskis, that's what it was. Okay, I was gonna say Ashkenazis, like they was the Jewish people in Russia, but no, it's the Anenskis, which is some family. They had a daughter who had finished the institute, and then to Mary Pavlovna's great grief, it happened that Eugene cheapened himself, as she expressed it, by falling in love with Liza and Yenska and proposing to her. From that time, his relations with Stipendia ceased. Oh man. Okay, so Pandia was kind of just being used by everybody, and now Eugene cut her off. We'll see what happens. Uh, yeah. Shout out. Continue. Keep stopping his beat to laugh at shit. uh, Shouts out to Against the World G. Enjoying his little time with his old lady. Yes. Shouts out to Raheem. I will be over at his house playing 2K as Joe Biden later. So, assuming he doesn't get off work at like 11 o'clock tonight. Yes. Chapter 5. It is impossible to explain why Eugene chose Liza Askenyatskaya, as it was always impossible to explain why a man chooses this and not that woman. There were many reasons, positive and negative. One reason was that she was not a very rich heiress such as his mother sought for him. Another, that she was naive and to be pitied in her relations with her mother. Another, that she was not a beauty who attracted general attention to herself, and yet she was definitely not bad looking. But the chief reason that his acquaintance with her began at that time when he was ripe for marriage. He fell in love because he knew that he could marry. Liza Anyinskaya was at first merely pleasing to Eugene, but when he decided to make her his wife, his feelings for her became much stronger. He felt that he was in love. Liza was tall and slender and long. Everything about her was long, her face, her nose, not prominently but downwards, and her fingers and her feet. The color of her face was very delicate, creamy, delicately pink, and she had long, soft, and curly light brown hair, and beautiful eyes, clear, mild, and confounding. Those eyes especially struck Eugene. When he thought of Liza, he always saw those clear, mild, confiding eyes. Such was she physically. He knew nothing of her spiritually, but only saw those eyes, and those eyes seemed to tell him all he needed to know. The meaning of their expression was this: while still in institute when she was 15, Liza used continually to fall in love with all the attractive men she met, and was animated and happy only when she was in love. After leaving the institute, she continued to fall in love just the same way with all the young men she met, and of course fell in love with Eugene as soon as she made his acquaintance. It was this being in love which gave her eyes the particular expression which so captivated Eugene. Already that winter she had been in love with two young men at one and the same time, and blushed and became excited not only when they entered the room, but whenever their names were mentioned. Oh man. But afterwards, when her mother hinted to that Interyev seemed to have serious intentions, her love for him increased, so that she became almost indifferent to the two previous attractions. And when Iturniev began to come to their balls and parties, and dance with her more than with others, and evidently only wished to know whether she loved him, her love for him became painful. She dreamed of him in her sleep, and seemed to see him when she was awake in a dark room. Everyone else vanished from her mind. But when he proposed, and they were formally engaged, and when they had kissed one another, and were a betrothed couple, then she had no thoughts but of him, no desire but to be with him, to love him, and to be loved by him. She was also proud of him, and felt emotional about him and herself, and her love quite melted and felt faint from love for him. The more he got to know her, the more he loved her. He had not known at all that he could expect to find such love, and it strengthened his own feelings still more. Ah man. Chapter 6. Toward spring he went to his estate at Semenskovy to have a look at it, give directions about management, and especially about the house, which was being done up for his wedding. Mary Pavlovna was dissatisfied with her son's choice, not only because the match was not as brilliant as it might have been, but also because she did not like Var- Varvara Alexeyevna, his future mother-in-law. That's such a hard name. Whether she was good-natured or not, she didn't know and could not decide. But that she was not well-bred, not comme il faut, not a lady, as Mary Pavlovna had said to herself, she saw from their first acquaintance, and this distressed her because she was accustomed to the value of breeding, and knew that Eugene was sensitive to it, and she foresaw that he would suffer much annoyance on this account. But she did like the girl, liked her chiefly because Eugene did. One could not help loving her, and Mary Pavlovna was quite sincerely ready to do so. Eugene found his mother contented and in good spirits. When she was getting everything straight in the house and preparing to go away herself, as soon as he brought his young wife, Eugene persuaded her to stay for the time being, and the future remained undecided. In the evening after tea Mary Pavlovna played patience as usual. Eugene sat by her, helping her. This was the hour of their most intimate talks. Having finished one game, and while preparing to begin another, she looked up at him with a little hesitation and began thus: "I wanted to tell you, Genya, of course I do not know, but in general I wanted to suggest to you that before your wedding it is absolutely necessary to have finished with all your bachelor affairs, so that nothing may disturb either you or your wife. God forbid that it should. You understand me?" And again Eugene at once understood that Mary Pavlovna was hitting at his relations with Stipendia, which had ended in the previous autumn, and that she had attributed much more importance to those relations than they deserved, as solitary women always do. Eugene blushed not from shame so much as from vexation that good-natured Mary Pavlovna was bothering, out of affection no doubt, but was still bothering about matters that were not her business, and that she did not and could not understand. He answered that there was nothing that needed concealment, and that he had always conducted himself so that there would be nothing to hinder his marriage. "Oh dear, this is excellent. Only, Genya, don't be vexed with me," said Mary Pavlovna, and broke off in confusion. Eugene saw that she had not finished and had not said what she wanted to. This was confirmation when a little later she began to tell him how in his absence she had been asked to stand godmother at Petchnikov's. Eugene flushed again, not at vexation or shame this time, but at some strange consciousness of the importance of what was about to be told to him, an involuntary consciousness quite at variance with conclusions, and what he expected happened. Mary Pavlovna, as if merely by way of conversation, mentioned that this year only boys were being born, evidently a sign of a coming war. Both at the Vazins and the Petchnikovs, the young wife had a first child, at each house a boy. Mary Pavlovna wanted to say this casually, but she herself felt ashamed when she saw the color mount to her son's face, and saw him nervously removing, tapping, and replacing his pince nez, and hurriedly lighting a cigarette. She began, silent. He too was silent, and could not think of how to break that silence. So they both understood that they had understood one another. The chief thing is that there should be justice and no favoritism.
in the village as under your grandfather.
Mama, Eugene said suddenly, I know why you are saying this. You have no need to be disturbed. My future family life is so sacred to me that I should not infringe it in any case. And as to what occurred in my bachelor days, that is quite ended. I never formed any union and no one has any claims on me.
Well, I am glad, said his mother. I know how noble your feelings are.
Eugene accepted his mother's words as a tribute to him and did not reply. The next day he drove into town, thinking of his fiancée and of anything in the world except stipendia, but as purposely to remind him on approaching the church, he met people walking and driving back from it. He met old Métivier and Simon, with some lads and girls, and then two women, one elderly and one who seemed familiar. The woman was walking, lightly and boldly, carrying a child in her arms. He came up to them, and the elder woman bowed, stopping in the old-fashioned way, but the young woman with the child only bent her head. From under the handkerchief gleamed familiar, merry, smiling eyes. Yeah, that was she. But all that was over, and it was no use looking at her. And that child may be mine, flashed through his mind. No, what nonsense. There was her husband. She used to see him. He had not even considered the matter further, so settled in his mind that it had been necessary for his health. He had paid her money, and there was no more to be said. There had been, and there could be no question of any union between them. It was not that he stifled the voice of consciousness, no, his conscience simply said nothing to him, and he thought no more about her after the conversation with his mother in the meeting. Nor did he meet her again. Eugene was married in town a week after Easter, and left at once with his young wife for the country estate. The house had been arranged as usual for a young couple. Mary Pavlovna wished to leave, but Eugene begged her to remain, and Liza still more strongly, and she only moved into the detached wing of the house. And so a new life began for Eugene. Checking my email. Shouts out to, again, this is the world, G. Shouts out to Don't Watch Continue. Yes. Don't Watch Continue still live making his beat. Oh man. Chapter 7. Leo Tolstoy continues. So go subscribe to continue. The first year of his marriage was a hard one for Eugene. It was hard because of affairs he had managed to put off during the time of his courtship. Now, after his marriage, all came on him at once. To escape from debts was impossible. An outlying part of the estate was sold and the most pressing obligations met. But others remained and he had no money. The estate yielded a good revenue, but he had to send payments to his brother and spend it on his own marriage so that there was no ready money and the factory could not carry on. It would have to be closed down. The only way to escape this was to use his wife's money, and Liza, having realized her husband's position, insisted on this herself. Eugene agreed, but only on condition that he should give her a mortgage on half his estate, which he did. Of course, this was done not for his wife's sake, who felt offended at it, but to appease his mothers-in-law. These affairs, with various fluctuations of success and failure, helped poison Eugene's life in that first year. Another thing was his wife's ill health. That same first year in autumn, 7 months after their marriage, a misfortune befell Liza. She was driving out to meet her husband on his return from town. The quiet horse became rather playful, She was frightened and jumped out. Her jump was comparatively fortunate. She might have been caught by the wheel, but she was pregnant, and that same night the pains began, and she had a miscarriage from which she was long in recovering. The loss of the expected child and wife's illness, together with the disorder in his affairs, and above all the presence of his mother-in-law, who arrived as soon as Liza fell ill, all this together made the year still harder for Eugene. But notwithstanding these difficult circumstances, towards the end of the first year Eugene felt very well. First of all, he cherished hope in restoring his fallen fortune, and renewing his grandfather's way of life in a new form was approaching accomplishment, though slowly and with difficulty. There was no longer any question of having to sell the whole estate to meet his debts. The chief estate, though transferred to his wife's name, was saved, and if only beet crop succeeded and the price kept up, by next year the position of one in stress might be replaced by one of complete prosperity. That was one thing. Another was, however much he had expected from his wife, he had never expected to find in her what he actually found. He found not what he had expected, but something much better. Raptures of love, though he tried to produce them, did not take place or were very slight, but he discovered something quite different, namely, that he was not merely more cheerful and happier, but that it had become easier to live. He didn't know why this should be so, but it was. And it was so because immediately after his marriage, his wife decided that Eugene Interyev was superior to anyone else in the world, wiser, purer, and nobler than them, and that therefore it was right for everyone to serve him and please him, but that, as it was possible to make everyone do this, she must do it herself to the limit of her strength. And she did, dedicating all her strength of mind towards learning and guessing at what he liked, and then doing just that thing, whatever it was and however difficult it might be. She had the gift which furnishes the chief delight of intercourse with a loving woman. Thanks to her love of her husband, she penetrated into his soul. She knew his every state and his every shade of feeling. Better it seemed to him than himself. But she behaved correspondingly, and therefore never hurt his feelings, but always lessened his distresses and strengthened his joys. And she understood not only his feelings but also his joys, things quite foreign to her, concerning the farming, the factory, or the appraisement of others. She immediately understood, so that she could not merely converse with him, but could often, as he said himself, be a useful and irreplaceable counselor. She regarded affairs and people and everything in the world only through his eyes. She loved her mother, and having seen that Eugene disliked his mother-in-law's interference in their life, she immediately took her husband's side, and did so with such decision that he had to restrain her. Besides all this, she had very good taste, much tact, and above all, she had repose. All that she did unnoticed. Only the results of what she did were observable, namely that always and in everything there was a cleanliness, order, and elegance. Liza had at once understood in what her husband's ideal of life consisted. She tried to attain, and in the arrangement and order of the house did attain, what he wanted. Children, it is true, were lacking, but there was hope of that also. In winter she went to Petersburg to see a specialist, and he assured them that she was quite well and could have children. And this desire was accomplished. By the end of the year she was again pregnant. The thing that threatened, not to say poisoned, their happiness was her jealousy, a jealousy she restrained and did not exhibit, but from which she often suffered. Not only might Eugene not love any other woman, because there was not a woman on earth worthy of him. As to whether she herself was worthy or not she never asked herself, but not a single woman might therefore dare to love him. God, this is getting more and more toxic. Chapter 8. This was how they lived. He rose early as he had always done. They went to see the farm or to the factory where work was going on, or sometimes to the fields. Towards 10 o'clock he would come back for his coffee, which they would have on the veranda. Mary Pavlovna, an uncle who lived with them, and Liza. After a conversation which was often very animated, while they drank their coffee and dispersed till dinner time. At 2 o'clock they dined and then went for a walk or a drive. In the evening, when he returned from his office, they drank their evening tea, and sometimes he read aloud while she worked, or when there were guests, they had music or conversations. When he went away on business, he wrote his wife, and received letters from her every day. Sometimes she accompanied him, and then they were particularly merry. On his name day and on hers guests assembled, and it pleased him to see how well she managed to arrange these things, so that everybody enjoyed coming. He saw and heard that they all admired her, this young agreeable hostess, and he loved her still more for this. All went excellently. He bore her pregnancy easily, and thought, though they were afraid, they both began making plans as to how they would bring the child up. The system of education and the arrangements were all decided by Eugene, and her only wish was to carry out his desires obediently. Eugene, on his part, read up on medical works, and intended to bring the child up accordingly with all the precepts of science. She, of course, agreed to everything and made preparations, making warm and also cool envelopes and preparing a cradle. Thus the second year of their marriage arrived in the second spring. Whew, chapter 9. Yeah, in Eastern Europe they have name days where people actually have different days to celebrate some of the more common names in their countries. And they've always had them. It continues out for now, I guess. We could probably find another beat by him. There's all kinds of love going out to continue, all kinds of love to Dog Rose, Dead Mind, the rest of the Groningen gang. Ah, yes. All kinds of love to the foes. Against the world, child. All kinds of love to Rakim, whose house I will be at later. For our Biden stream. Yes, it's going to be fun on a bun. Doing the Joe Biden stream. Ooh, shouts out to the r/alternate history of Discord. Let me check and see if we got any. Yeah, nothing really for me. But they're having fun, and that's all that matters. You also join their subreddit. Take a look at some of those creations. Everyone makes their own alternate languages and countries. It's very dope. That's why I'm kind of very excited to see how Cody of Alternate History Up goes with his contest, because I really think I did pretty well. And I'm competing against people who make up their own languages. Who am I kidding? I literally put the writer in my name. I know how to make up my languages. Chapter 9. It was just before Trinity Sunday. Liza was in her 5th month, and though careful, she was still brisk and active. Both his mother and hers were living in the house, but under the pretext of watching and safeguarding her, only upset her by their tiffs. Eugene was specifically engrossed with a new experiment for the cultivation of sugar beet on a large scale. Just before Trinity, Liza decided that it was necessary to have a thorough house cleaning, as it hadn't been done since Easter, and she hired 2 women by the day to help the servants wash the floors and windows, beat the furniture and the carpets, put covers on them. These women came in early in the morning, heated the coppers, and set to work. One of the two was Stipendia, who had just weaned her baby boy and had begged for the job of washing the floors through the office clerk, whom she now carried on with. She wanted to have a good look at their new mistress. Stipendia was living by herself as formerly, her husband being away, and she was up to tricks she had formerly been first with old Daniel, who had at once caught her taking some logs of firewood, and afterwards with the master, and now with the young clerk. She was not concerning herself any longer about her master. He has a wife now, she thought, but it would be good to have a look at the lady in her establishment. Folks said it was well arranged. Eugene had not seen her since he had met her with the child. Having a baby to attend to, she had not been going out to work, and he seldom walked through the village. That morning, on the eve of Trinity Sunday, he got up at 5 o'clock and rode to the fallow land which was to be sprinkled with phosphates, and had left the house before the women were about, and while they were still engaged in lighting copper fires. He returned to breakfast merry, contented, and hungry, dismounting from his mare at the gate and handing her over to the gardener, flicking the high grass with his whip and repeating a phrase he had just uttered, as one often does. He walked towards the house. The phrase was "Phosphates justify" what or whom he knew neither nor reflected. They were beating a carpet on the grass. The furniture had been brought out. "There now, what a house cleaning Liza has undertaken! Phosphates justify. What a manageress she is! A manageress, yes, a manageress," he said to himself, vividly imagining her in a white wrapper, with her smiling, joyful face, as it nearly always was when he looked at her. "Yes, I must change my boots, or else phosphates justify. That is, I smell of manure. And the manageress is in such a condition. Why in such a condition? Because a little new internymph is growing inside her." He thought, "Yes, phosphates justify," and smiled at his thoughts. He put his hand toward the door of his room, but he had not time to push the door before it opened of itself, and he came face to face with a woman coming towards him carrying a pail, barefoot, and with sleeves turned up high. He stepped aside to let her pass, and she stepped aside, adjusting her neckerchief with a wet hand. Go on, I won't go in if you. Eugene began, and suddenly stopped, recognizing her. She glanced merrily at him with smiling eyes, and pulling down her skirt, went out the door. "What nonsense! It is impossible," said Eugene to himself, frowning and waving his hand as though to get rid of a fly, displeased at having noticed her. He was vexed that he had noticed her, and yet he could not take his eyes from her strong body, swayed by her agile strides, the pleasing folds of her shirt, and the handsome skirt tucked up high above her white calves. "But why am I looking?" said he to himself, lowering his eyes so as not to see her. "And anyhow I must go in and get some other boots." And he turned back to go to his own room, but had not gone 5 steps before he again glanced round to have another look at her, without knowing why or wherefore. She was just going round the corner, and also glanced at him. "What am I doing?" said he to himself. "She may think. It is even certain that she already does think." He entered his damp room. Another woman, an old one, a skinny one, was there, and was washing it still. Eugene passed on tiptoe across the floor, wet with dirty water, to the wall where his boots stood. He was about to leave the room when the woman herself went out. "This one is gone, and the other, Stipendia, will come here alone." Someone within him began to reflect. "My God, what am I thinking of, and what am I doing?" He seized his boots and ran out with them into the hall, put them on there, brushed himself, and went up to the veranda, where both his mammas were already drinking coffee. Liza had evidently been expecting him, and had come onto the veranda, through the other door at the same time. My God, if she who considers me so honorable, pure, and innocent, if only she knew, thought he. Liza, as usual, met him with a shining face, but today somehow she seemed him particularly pale, yellow, long, and weak. During coffee, as often happened, a particularly feminine kind of conversation went on, which had no logical sequence, but which evidently was connected in some way, for it went on uninterrupted. The two old ladies were pin-pricking one another, and Liza was skillfully maneuvering between them. I am so vexed that I have not finished washing your room before you got back, she said to her husband, but I do want to get everything arranged. Well, did you sleep well after I got up? Yes, I slept well and I feel well. How can a woman be well in condition during this intolerable heat when her windows face the sun? Oh, never mind. I'm getting characters confused already. It's great. But how can a woman in her condition during this inexorable heat when the windows face the sun? Said Varvara Alexeyevna to her mother. And they have no Venetian blinds or awnings. I always had awnings. But you know, we are in the shade after 10 o'clock, said Mary Pavlovna. That causes fever, it comes of dampness, said Varvara Alexeyevna, not noticing that she was saying did not agree with what she had just said. My doctor always says it is impossible to diagnose an illness unless one knows the patient. And he certainly knows, for he is the leading physician and we pay him 100 roubles a visit. My late husband did not believe in doctors, but he did not grudge me anything. How can a man grudge anything to a woman when perhaps her life and child's depend? Yes, when she has a maid, a wife need not depend her husband. A good wife submits to her husband, said Varvara Alexeyevna. Only Liza is too weak after her illness. Oh no, mamma, I feel quite well. But why have you not bought any cream? I do not want any. I can do with raw cream. I offered I offered some to Ravana Alexeyevna, but she declined, said Mary Pavlovna, as if justifying herself. No, I don't want any today. As if to terminate. And as if to terminate unpleasant conversation, yield magnanimously, Varvara Alexeyevna turned to Eugene and said, Well, and you have sprinkled the phosphates. Liza ran to fetch the cream. But I don't want it, I don't want it. Liza, go gently, said Mary Pavlovna. Such rapid movements do her harm. Nothing does harm as one's mind is at peace, said Varvara Alexeyevna, as if referring to something, though she knew there was nothing her words could refer to. Liza returned with the cream, and Eugene drank his coffee and listened morosely. He was accustomed to these conversations, but today he was particularly annoyed by its lack of sense. He wanted to think over what had happened to him, but this chatter disturbed him. Having finished her coffee, Varvara Alexeyevna went away in a bad humor. Liza, Eugene, and Mary Pavlovna stayed behind, and their conversation was simple and pleasant. But Liza, being sensitive, at once noticed something was tormenting Eugene, and she asked him whether anything unpleasant had happened. He was not prepared for this question and hesitated a little before replying that there had been nothing. This reply made Liza think all the more that something was tormenting him, and greatly tormenting. It was evident to her that a fly had fallen into the milk, yet he would not speak of it. What could it be? It's all unraveling for Eugene. Uh, oh wow, this is actually like another 20 pages and then some. Bet. It's a slow burn. Just for the record, we gotta show Tolstoy love from now till the end of time because most writers consider him the single greatest writer of the modern era. By comparison, the likes of Dickens is number 7 on that same list. Just take a minute to let that sink in. Tolstoy's pretty dope. Whew. These chapters are short too, and I love it. Chapter 11. After breakfast, they all dispersed. Eugene, as usual, went to his study, but instead of beginning to read or write his letters, he sat smoking one cigarette after another and thinking. He was terribly surprised and disturbed by the unexpected rubenescence within him and the bad feeling from which he had thought himself free since his marriage. Since then, he had not once experienced that feeling, either for her, the woman he had known, or for any other woman except his wife. He had often felt glad of his emancipation, and now suddenly a chance meeting, seemingly so unimportant, revealed to him the fact that he was not free. What tormented him was not that he was yielding to do that feeling and desired her. He did not dream of doing so, but that feeling was awake within him, and he had to be on his guard against it. He had no doubt but that he would suppress it. He had a letter to answer and a paper to write, and sat down at his writing table and began to work. Having finished it and quite forgotten what disturbed him, he went out to go to the stables, and again, as luck would have it, either by unfortunate chance or intentionally, as soon as he stepped from the porch, a red skirt and a red kerchief appeared from round the corner, and she went past him, swinging her arms and swaying her body. Not only past him, but on passing him ran, as if playfully to overtake her fellow servant. Again, the bright midday, the nettles, the back of Daniel's hut, and in the shade of the plane trees, her smiling face biting some leaves, rose in his imagination. No, it is impossible to let matters continue so, he said to himself, and waiting till the woman had passed out of sight, he went to the office. It was just the dinner hour, and he hoped to find the steward still there. As it so happened, the steward was just waking up from his after-dinner nap, and stretching himself and yawning, was standing in the office, looking at the herdsman, who was telling him something. "Vilasy Nikolaevich," said Eugene to the steward, "what is your pleasure? I want to speak with you. What is your pleasure?" "Just finish what you were saying." "Aren't you going to bring it in?" said Vilasy Nikola to the herdsman. "It is heavy, Vilasy Nikolaevich." "What is it?" asked Eugene. "Why, the cow has caved in the middle." "Well, all right. I'll order them a harness, a horse at once. Tell Nicholas Yushkin to get out the dairy cart." The herdsman went out. "Do you know," began Eugene, flushing and conscious he was doing so, "do you know, Vilasy Nikolaevich, that when I was a bachelor, I went off track a little bit. You may have heard." Vilasy Nikolaevich, evidently sorry for his master, said with smiling eyes, "Is it about stipendia?" "Why, yes. Look here, please do not engage with her to help in the house. You understand, it is very awkward for me." "Yes, it must have been Vanya the clerk who arranged it." "Yes, please, I've heard the rest of the phosphates are being shrewd," said Eugene to hide his confusion. "Yes, I am going to see to it." So the matter ended, and Eugene calmed down, hoping that he had lived for a year without seeing her, so things would go on now. "Besides, Vilasy Nikolaevich will speak to Ivan the clerk, Ivan will speak to her, and she will understand that I don't want it," said Eugene to himself, and he was glad that he had forced himself to speak with Vilasy Nikolaevich, hard as it had been to do so. Yes, it is better, much better, than that feeling of doubt and the remembrance of shame. He shuddered at the mere remembrance of his sin and thought. Yeah. Chapter 12. Moral effort he had made to overcome his shame and speak to Vasilij Nikolaevich tranquilized Eugene. It seemed to him that the matter was all over now. Liza at once noticed that he was quite calm and even happier than usual. No doubt he was upset by her mother's pin-pricking one another. Really is disagreeable, especially for him who was so sensitive and noble, always to hear such unfriendly and ill-mannered insinuations, thought she. The next day was Trinity Sunday. It was a beautiful day, and the peasant women on their way to the woods to plait wreaths came, according to custom, to the landowner's home and began to sing and dance. Mary Pavlovna and Varvara Alexeyevna came out on the porch in smart clothes, carrying sunshades, and went up to the ring of slingers. With them, in the jacket of Chinese silk, came out the uncle, a flabby libertine and drunkard who was living that summer with Eugene. As usual, there is a bright many-colored ring of these young women and girls, at the center of everything, and around these from different sides, like attendant planets that had detached themselves, were circling around, winged girls hand in hand, rustling with their new print gowns, young lads giggling and running backwards and forwards after one another, full-grown men in dark blue and black coats and caps with red shirts who unceasingly spat out sunflower seeds, and the domestic servants, or other outsiders, watching the dance circle from aside. Both the old ladies went close up to the ring, and Liza accompanied them in a light blue dress, with light blue ribbons on her head, and with wide sleeves under which her long white arms and angular elbows were visible. Eugene did not want to come out, but it was ridiculous to hide, and he too came out on the porch smoking a cigarette, bowed to the men and lads, and talked with one of them. The women meanwhile shouted a dance song with all their might, snapping their fingers, clapping their hands, and dancing.
They are calling for the master,
Said a youngster, coming up to Eugene's wife, who had not noticed the call. Liza called Eugene to look at the dance, and at one of the women dancers who particularly pleased her. This was Stipendia. She wore a yellow skirt, a velveteen sleeveless jacket, and a silk handkerchief, and was broad, energetic, ruddy, and merry. No doubt she danced well. She saw nothing. Yes, yes, he said, removing and replacing his pince nez. Yes, he repeated. So it seems I cannot be rid of her, he thought. He did not look at her, fearing her attraction, and just on that account what his passing glance caught of her seemed to him especially attractive, because he saw by her sparkling look that she saw him, and that he admired her. He stood there as long as propriety demanded, and seeing that Varvara Alexeyevna called her "my dear," senselessly and insecurely was talking to her, he turned aside and went away. Oh no. He went inside the house in order not to see her, but on reaching the upper story he approached the window without knowing how or why, and as long as women remained on the porch, he stood there and looked at her, feasting his eyes on her. He ran while there was no one in him to see him, and then went with quiet steps onto the veranda, and from there, smoking a cigarette, he passed through the garden as if going through a stroll, and following the direction she had taken. He had not gone 2 steps along the alley before he noticed behind the trees a velveteen sleeveless jacket with a pink and yellow skirt and red handkerchief. She was going somewhere with another woman. Where are they going? And suddenly a terrible desire scorched him, as though a hand were seizing his heart. As if by someone else's wish, he looked round and went towards her.
Eugenie Ivanovich, Eugenie Ivanovich, I have come to see your honor,
Said a voice behind him, and Eugene, seeing old Samokin, who was dragging a well with him, roused himself, and turning quickly round, went to meet Simokin. And while speaking with him, he turned sideways and saw that she and the woman who was with her went down the slope, evidently to the well, or making an excuse of the well, and having stopped there a little while, ran back to the dance circle. Foe, and that's the only thing I'm screaming. It's foe. That's the only thing I'm screaming. 1 plus 3 is foe. So chapter 13 is foe. It's always foe. Sacred foe. Foe geometry. Let me check my phone. Because I'm kind of waiting for an email. See how things are going, but it does not look promising. Okay, we good. Chapter 13. After talking to Samukin, Eugene returned to the house, as depressed as if he had committed a crime. In the first place, she had understood him, believed that he wanted to see her, and desired it herself. Secondly, that other woman, Anna Prokova, evidently knew of it. Above all, he felt that he was conquered, that he was not master of his own will, but that there was another power moving him, that he had been saved only by a good fortune, and that if not today, then tomorrow or a day later he would perish all the same. Yes, perish. He did not understand it otherwise. To be unfaithful. Get out of here, fly. To his young and loving wife with a peasant woman in the village, in the sight of everyone. What was it but to perish, perish utterly, so that it would be impossible to live? No, something must be done.
My God, what am I to do? Can it possibly be that I shall perish like this?
Said he to himself. It is not possible to do anything. Yet something must be done. Do not think about her, he ordered himself.
Do not think.
And immediately he began thinking of and seeing her before him, seeing also the shade of the pine tree. And he remembered having read of a hermit who, to avoid the temptation he felt for a woman on whom he had to lay his hand to heal her, thrust his other hand into the brazier and burnt his fingers. He called that to mind.
Yes, I am ready to burn my fingers rather than to perish.
He looked round to make sure that there was no one in the room, lit a candle, and put a finger in the flame.
There, now, think about her,
he said to himself ironically. It hurt him. He withdrew his smoke-stained finger, threw away the match, and laughed at himself. What nonsense. That was not what had to be done, but it was necessary to do something to avoid seeing her. Either to go away himself or to send her away. Yes, send her away. Often her husband, money, would remove to town or to another village. People would hear of it and would talk about it. Well, what of that? At any rate, it was better than this danger.
Yes, it must be done,
he said to himself. At that very moment, he was looking at her without moving his eyes.
Where is she going?
He suddenly asked. She, it seemed to him, had seen him in the window, and now, having glanced at him, and taken another woman by the hand, and was going towards the garden, swinging her arm briskly, without knowing why or wherefore, merely in accord with what he had been thinking. He went to the office. Vasily Nikolaich, in the holiday costume with oiled hair, was sitting at tea with his wife and a guest who was wearing an oriental handkerchief.
I want a word with you, Vasily Nikolaich.
Please say what you want to. We have finished tea.
No, I'd rather you came out with me.
Directly, only let me get my cap. Tanya, put out the samovar, said Vasily Nikolaich, stepping outside cheerfully. It seemed to Eugene that Vasily had been drinking, but what was to be done? It might be all the better he would sympathize with him in his difficulties more readily.
I have come again to speak about the same matter, Vasily Nikolaevich, said Eugene, about that woman.
Well, what of her?
I told them not to take her again, on any account. No, I've been thinking in general, and this is what I wanted to take your advice about. Is it possible to get them away, to send the whole family away?
Where can they be sent? Said Vasily disapprovingly and ironically as it seemed to Eugene.
Well, I thought of giving them money or even some land in Koltovsky, so that she would not be here. But how can they be sent away? Where is he to go? Torn up from his roots. And why should you do it? You can harm yourself more than she can harm you. Ah, Vasily Nikolaevich, you must understand that it would be dreadful for my wife to hear of it.
But who will tell her?
How can I live with this dread? The whole thing is very painful for me. But really, why should you distress yourself? Whoever stirs up the past out with his eye, who is not a sinner before God and to blame before the Tsar, as the saying is, all the same, it would be better to get rid of them. Can't you speak to the husband?
But it is no use speaking. Eugene Ivanovich, what is the matter with you? It is all past and forgotten. All sorts of things happen. Who is there that you would now say anything bad of you? Everyone sees you.
But all the same, go and have a talk with him.
All right, I will speak to him. Though he knew nothing would come of it, this talk somewhat calmed Eugene. Above all, it made him feel that through the excitement he had been exaggerating the danger. Had he gone to meet her by appointment? It was impossible. He had simply gone to stroll in the garden, and she had happened to run out at that time. Chapter 14. After dinner, the very Trinity Sunday, Liza, while walking home from the garden to the meadow where her husband wanted to show her the clover, took a false step and fell when crossing a little ditch. She fell gently on her side, but she gave an exclamation, and her husband saw the expression on her face of not only fear but of pain. He was about to help her up, but she motioned him away with her hand. "Wait a bit, Eugene," she said with a weak smile, and looked up guiltily, as it seemed to him. "My foot only gave way under me."
There we always say, remarked Varvara Alexeyevna. Can anyone in her condition possibly jump over ditches?
"But it is all right, Mamma. I shall get up directly." With her husband's help she did get up, but she immediately turned pale and looked frightened. "Yes, I am not well." And she whispered something to another. "Oh, God, what have you done? I said you ought not to go there," cried Varvara Alexeyevna. "Wait, I'll call the servant. She must not mock. She must be carried. Do not be afraid."
Do not be afraid, Liza. I will carry you,
said Eugene, putting his arm around her. "Hold me by the neck like that." Then stooping down, he put his right arm under her knees and lifted her. He could never afterwards forget the suffering yet beatific expression of her face. "I am too heavy for you, dear," she said with a smile. "Mamma is running. Tell her." And she bent towards him and kissed him. She evidently wanted her mother to see now that he was carrying her. Eugene shouted to Varvara Alexeyevna not to hurry and that he would carry Liza home. Varvara Alexeyevna stopped and began to shout still louder. "You will drop her. You will be sure to drop her. You want to destroy her. You have no conscience."
but I am carrying her excellently.
I do not want to watch you killing my daughter, and I can't.
And she ran round the bend in the alley. "Never mind, it will pass," said Liza. "Oh, never mind, it will pass," said Russia. "I'm dying." Nah, said Liza, smiling. "Yes, if it only does not have consequences like last time."
No, I am not speaking of that. That is all right. I mean, Mamma, you are tired. Rest a bit.
Though he found it heavy, Eugene carried his burden profoundly and gladly to the house, and did not hand her over to the housemaid and the man-cook whom Varvara Alexeyevna had found and sent to meet them. He carried her to the bedroom and put her on the bed. "No, go away," she said, and drawing his hand near her, she kissed it. "Anushka and I will manage all right." Mary Pavlovna also ran in from her rooms in the wing. They undressed Liza and laid her on the bed. Eugene sat in the drawing-room with a book in his hand, waiting. Varvara Alexeyevna went past him with such a reproachful, gloomy air that he felt alarmed.
Well, how's it going?
He asked.
How is it? What's good of asking? It's probably what you wanted when you made your wife jump over a ditch.
Varvara Alexeyevna, he cried, that is impossible. If you want to torment people into poison their life.
He wanted to say then go elsewhere and do it, but he restrained himself.
How is it that it does not hurt you?
It's too late now. And shaking her
cap in a triumphant manner, she passed out by the door. The fall really had been a bad one. Liza's foot twisted awkwardly, and there was a danger of her having another miscarriage. Everyone knew that there was nothing to be done, but that she must lay quietly. Yet all the same they decided to send for the doctor. "Dear Nikolay Semenich," wrote Eugene to the doctor, "you've always been so kind of us that I hope you will not refuse to come to my wife's assistance." She and then went on. Having written the letter, he went to the stables to arrange about the horses and carriages. Horses had to be ready to bring the doctor, and others to take him back. When an estate is not run on a large scale, such things cannot be quickly decided, but have to be considered. Having arranged it all and dispatched the coachman, it was past 9 before he got back to the house. His wife was lying down and said that she felt perfectly well and had no pain, but Varvara Alexeyevna was sitting with a lamp screened from Liza by some sheets of music and knitting a large red coverlet, with a mien that said that after what had happened peace was impossible, but that she at any rate would do her duty no matter what anyone else did. Eugene noticed this, but to try and appear as if he had not done so, tried to assume a cheerful and tranquil air, and told how he had chosen the horses, and how capitally the more Kabushka had galloped his left trace horse in the Chorka.
Yes, of course, it is the time to exercise the horses when help is needed. Probably the doctor will also be thrown in a ditch,
remarked Varvara Alexeyevna, examining her knitting from under her pince-nez and moving it close up to the lamp.
But you know we had to send out one way or another, and I made the best arrangement I could.
Yes, I remember how very well your horses galloped with me under the arch of the gateway.
This was a long-standing fancy of hers, and Eugene was now injudicious enough to remark that he was not quite what had happened.
It is not for nothing that I have always said, and you've often remarked to the prince, that the hardest of all to live with people who are untruthful and insincere. How can you do anything except that?
Well, if anyone has to suffer more than another, it is certainly I, said Eugene, but you.
Yes, that is evident.
What?
Nothing, I'm only counting my stitches.
Eugene was standing at the time by the bed, and Liza was looking at him. One of her moist hands outside the coverlet caught his hand and pressed it. "Be with her for my sake. You know she cannot prevent our loving one another," was what her look said.
I won't do so again. It's nothing.
He whispered and kissed her damp, long hand, and then her affectionate eyes, which closed when he kissed them.
Can it be the same thing over again? He asked. How are you feeling?
"I am afraid to sigh for fear of being mistaken, but I feel that he is alive and will live, said she, glancing at her stomach.
Oh, it is dreadful, dreadful to think of.
Notwithstanding Liza's insistence that he should go away, Eugene spent the night with her, hardly closing an eye and ready to attend on her. But she passed the night well, and had they not sent for the doctor, she would perhaps got up. By dinner time the doctor arrived, and of course said that though the symptoms recurred, there might be cause for apprehension. Yet, actually, there was no positive symptoms. But as there was also no contrary indications, one might suppose, on that one hand, that, and on the other hand, that, and therefore she must lie still, and that.
I do not like prescribing, yet all the same she should take this mixture and lie quiet.
Besides this, the doctor gave Varvara Alexeyevna a lecture on women's anatomy, during which Varvara Alexeyevna nodded her head significantly. Having received his fee as usual into the backmost part of his palm, the doctor drove away, and the patient was left to lie in bed for a week. Chapter 15. Eugene spent most of his time by his wife's bedside, talking to her, reading to her, and what was hardest of all, enduring without murmur Varvara Alexeyevna's attacks, and even contriving to turn these into jokes. But he could not stay at home all the time. In the first place, his wife sent him away, saying that he would fall ill if he always remained with her. And secondly, the farming was progressing in a way that demanded his presence at every step. He could not stay at home, but had to be in the fields, in the wood, in the garden, at the thrashing floor, and everywhere he was pursued not merely by the thought, but by the vivid image of Stipendia, and he only occasionally forgot her. But that would not have mattered. He could perhaps have mastered his feeling. What was worst of all was that, whereas he had previously lived for months without seeing her, he now continually came across her. She evidently understood that he wished to renew relations with her, and tried to come in his way. Nothing was said either by him or by her, and therefore neither he nor she went directly to a rendezvous, but only sought opportunities of meeting. The most possible place for them to meet was in the forest, where peasant women went with sticks to collect grass for their cows. Eugene knew this, and therefore went there every day. He told himself that he would not go, and every day it seemed that by making his way to the forest, and on hearing the sound of voices standing behind the bushes with a sinking heart looking to see if she was there. Why he wanted to know whether it was she who was there, he did not know. If it had been she, and she had been alone, he would not have gone to her, so he believed. He would have run away, but he wanted to see her. Once he met her, as he was entering the forest, she came out of it with two other women, carrying a heavy sack full of grass on her back. A little earlier she would perhaps have met her in the forest. Now with the other women there, she could not go back to him. But though he realized this impossibility, he stood for a long time behind a hazel bush at the risk of attracting another woman's attention. Of course he did not return, but stayed there a long time, and great heavens, how delightful his imagination made her appear to him, and not only once, but 5 or 6 times, and each time more intensely. She had never seemed so attractive, and never had he been so completely in her power. He felt that he had lost control of himself and become almost insane. His strictness with himself had not weakened a jot. On the contrary, he saw all the abomination of his desire, and even of his action, for his going to the wood was an action. He knew that he only need come near her anywhere in the dark, and if possible touch her, and he would yield to his feelings. And he knew that it was only shame before people, before her, and no doubt before himself also, that he restrained him. And he knew, too, that he had sought conditions in which that shame would not be apparent darkness or proximity, in which it would be stifled by an animal passion, and therefore he knew that he was a wretched criminal, and despised and hated himself with all his soul. He hated himself because he still had not surrendered. Every day he prayed to God to strengthen him, to save him from perishing. And every day he determined that from today onward he would not take a step to see her, and he would forget her. Every day he devised a means of delivering himself from this enticement, but he made no use of those means. It was all in vain. One of those means was continual occupation, another was intense physical work and fasting, a third was imagining himself the shame that would fall upon him when everybody knew of it, his wife, his mother-in-law, and the folk around. He did all this, and it seemed to him that he was conquering. But midday came, the hour of their former meetings, and that hour when he had met her carrying the grass, and he went into the forest. Thus 5 days of torment passed. He only saw her from a distance, and did not once encounter her. Chapter 16. Liza was gradually recovering. She could move about and was only uneasy at the change that had taken place in her husband, which she did not understand. Varvara Alexeyevna had gone away for a while, and the only visitor was Eugene's uncle. Mary Pavlovna was usually at home. Eugene was in his semi-intense condition when there came 2 days of pouring rain, as often happens after thunder in June. The rain stopped all work. They even ceased creating manure on account of the dampness in the dirt. The peasants remained at home. The herdsmen wore themselves out with cattle and eventually drove them home. Cows and sheep wandered about the pasture land and ran loose in the grounds. The peasant women, barefoot and wrapped in shawls, splashing through the mud, rushed about to seek the runaway cows. Streams flowed everywhere along the paths. All the leaves and all the grass were saturated with water. The streams flowed unceasingly from the sprouts into the bubbling puddles. Eugene sat at home with his wife, who was particularly wearisome that day. She questioned Eugene several times as to the cause of his discontent. He replied with vexation that nothing was the matter. She ceased questioning him, but was still distressed. They were sitting after breakfast in the drawing-room. His uncle, for the 100th time, was recounting the fabrications about his society acquaintances. Liza was knitting a jacket and sighed, complaining of the weather and of the pain in the small of her back. The uncle advised her to lie down and asked for vodka for himself. It was terribly dull for Eugene in the house. Everything was weak and dull. He read a book and a magazine and understood nothing of them.
I must go out and look at the rasping machine they brought yesterday,
he said, and he got up and went out.
Take an umbrella with you.
Oh no, I have a leather coat. I'm only going as far as the boiling room.
He put on his boots and his leather coat and went to the factory. He had not gone 20 steps before he met her coming towards him, with her skirts tucked up high above her white calves. She was walking, holding down the shawl in which her head and shoulders were wrapped.
Where are you going?
Said he, not recognizing her the first instant. When he recognized her, it was already too late. She stopped smiling and looked long at him.
I'm looking for a calf. Where are you off to in such weather?
Said she, as if she were seeing him every day.
Come to the shed,
said he suddenly, without knowing how he said it. It was as if someone else had uttered the words. She bit her shawl, winked, and ran in the direction which led from the garden to the shed. And he continued his path, intending to turn off beyond the lilac bush and go there too.
Master,
He heard a voice behind.
the mistress is calling you and wants you to come back for a minute.
This was Misha, his manservant.
Oh God, this is the second time you have saved me.
Eugene immediately turned his back. His wife reminded him that he had promised to take some medicine at the dinner hour to a sick woman, and he had better take it with him. While they were getting the medicine, some 5 minutes elapsed, and then going away with the medicine, he hesitated to go direct to the shed, lest he should be seen from the house. But as soon as he was out of sight, he promptly turned and made his way to it. He already saw her in his imagination in the shed, smiling gaily. But she was not there, and there was nothing in the shed to show that she had been there. He was already thinking that she had not come and had not heard or understood his words. He had muttered them through his nose as if afraid of her hearing them, or perhaps she had not wanted to come.
And why did I imagine she would rush to me? She has her own husband. It is only I who am such a wretch as to have a wife, and a good one, and then run after another.
Thus he thought, sitting in the shed, in the thatch of which had a leak and dripped from its straw.
But how delightful it would be if she did come, alone here in this rain. If only I could embrace her once again, and let happen what may. But I could tell that she had been here by her footprints.
He reflected. He looked around the trodden ground near the shed, and at the path overgrown by the grass. And there was a fresh pair of bare feet, and even of one that had slipped and was visible.
Yes, she has been here. Well, now it is settled. Whether I may ever see her, I shall go straight to her. I will go to her at night.
He sat for a long time in the shed and left it exhausted and crushed. He delivered the medicine, returned home, and laid down in his room to wait for dinner. Oh, yeah. Chapter 17. Before dinner, Liza came to him, and still wondering what could be the cause of their discontent, began to say that she was afraid he did not like the idea of her going to Moscow for her confinement, and that she decided she would remain at home and on no account go to Moscow. He knew how she feared both her confinement itself and the risk of not having a healthy child, and therefore he could not help being touched at seeing her ready as she was to sacrifice everything for his sake. All was so nice, so pleasant, so clean in the house, and it was so dirty, despicable, and foul in his soul. The whole evening Eugene was tormented by knowing, notwithstanding his sincere repulsion at his own weakness, notwithstanding his firm intention to break off, the same thing would happen again tomorrow.
No, this is impossible, he said to himself, walking up and down in his room. There must be some remedy for it. My God, what am I to do?
Someone knocked at the door as foreigners do. He knew this must be his uncle.
Come in, he said.
Uncle came as a self-appointed ambassador for Liza.
Do you know, I really do notice that there is a change in you, he said. In Liza, I understand how it troubles her. I understand that it must be hard for you to leave all the business you have excellently started. But gave it to you, I should advise you to go away. It will be more satisfactory for both you and for her. And do you know, I should advise you to go to the Crimea. The climate is beautiful, and there will be an excellent accord there. You will just be in time for the best of grape season. Uncle,
Eugene suddenly exclaimed,
can you keep a secret? A secret that is terrible to me, a shameful secret. Oh, come, do you really have any doubt of me?
Uncle, you can help me. Not only help, but save me, said Eugene, and the thought of disclosing a secret to his uncle, whom he did not respect, the thought that he would show himself in the worst light and humiliate himself before him was pleasant. He felt himself despicable and guilty. He wished to punish himself.
Speak, my dear fellow. You know how fond I am of you,
said the uncle, evidently well content that there was a secret, and that it was a shameful one, and that it would be communicated to him,
and that he could be of great use. First of all, I must tell you that I'm a wretch, a good for nothing, a scoundrel, a real scoundrel.
Now, what are you saying? Began his uncle, as if he were offended.
What, not a wretch, when Liza's husband, Liza's one, has only known purity, her love, and that I, her husband, want to be untrue with her, with a pleasant woman. What is this? Why do you want to? You have not been unfaithful to her. Yes, at least just not the same as being untrue, for it did not depend on me. I was ready to do so. I was hindered, or else I should now. I do not ask what I should have done, but please explain to me. Well, it is like this. When I was a bachelor, I was stupid enough to have relations with a woman here in our village. That is to say, I used to have meetings with her in the forest and the field. Was she pretty?
asked his uncle. Eugene frowned at this question, but he was in such need of external help that he made as if he did not hear it and continued.
Well, I thought that this was just casual and that I should break it off and be done with it. And I did break it off before my marriage. For nearly a year, I did not see her, think about her.
It seemed strange to Eugene himself to hear the description of his own condition.
Then suddenly, I don't know why myself, really one sometimes believes in witchcraft. I saw her, and a worm crept into my heart, and it gnaws. I reproach myself. I understand the full horror of my action, that is to say, of the act I may commit at any moment. And yet, I myself turn to it. And if I have not committed it, it is only because God preserved me. Yesterday, I was on my way to see her when Liza sent for me. What, in the rain? Yes, uncle, I'm worn out, uncle, and I have decided to confess to you and ask for your help.
Yes, of course. It is a bad thing on your own estate. People will get to know. I understand that Lisa is weak and that it is necessary to spare her. But why on your own estate? Again, Eugene tried not to hear what his uncle was saying and hurried to the core of the matter.
Yes, save me from myself. That is what I ask of you. Today I was hindered by chance, but tomorrow or the next time, no one will hinder me. And she knows now. Don't leave me alone.
Yes, all right, said his uncle.
But are you really so much in love? Oh, it is not that at all. It is not that. It is some kind of power that has seized me and holds me. I do not know what to do. Perhaps I shall gain strength and then.
Well, it turns out as I suggested, said his uncle. Let us be off to the Crimea.
Yes, yes, let us go. And meanwhile, you will be with me, and you will talk to me.
Chapter 18. The fact that Eugene had confided his secret to his uncle and still more of the sufferings of his conscience had absorbed him. It was settled they would start for Yalta in a week's time. During that time, Eugene drove to town to get money for his journey. He gave instructions from the house and from the office concerning the management of the estate. Again became gay and friendly with his wife, and began to awaken morally. So without having once seen Stepandia after that rainy day, he left with his wife for the Crimea. There he spent an excellent 2 months. He received so many new impressions that it seemed to him the past was now obliterated from his memory. In the Crimea, they met former acquaintances who became particularly friendly with him, and they made new acquaintances. Life in Crimea was a continual holiday for Eugene, besides being instructive and beneficial. They became friendly there with the former marshal of the nobility of their province, a clever and liberal-minded man who became fond of Eugene and coached him and attracted him to his party. At the end of August, Liza gave birth to a beautifully healthy daughter, and her confinement was unexpectedly easy. In September, they returned home, four of them, including the baby and his wet nurse, as Liza was unable to nurse it herself. Eugene returned home entirely free from the former horrors, and quite a new and happy man. Having gone through all that a husband goes through when his wife bears a child, he loved her more than ever. His feeling for the child when it took it in his arms was a funny, new, very pleasant, and as if it were a tickling feeling. Another new thing in his life now was that, besides his occupation with the estate, thanks to his acquaintance with Dumshin, the ex-marshal, and the new interest occupied by his mind, that of Zemstov, partly an ambitious interest, partly because of a feeling of duty. In October there was to be a special assembly, at which he was to be elected. After arriving home he drove once to town and another time to Dumchin. Of the torments of his temptation and struggle he had forgotten even to think, and could with difficulty recall them to mind. It seemed to him something like an attack of insanity he had undergone. To such an extent he did now feel free from it, that he was not even afraid to make inquiries on the first occasion when he remained alone with the steward. As he had previously spoken to him about the matter, he was not ashamed to ask.
Well, and is Isidore Pekinal still away from his home?
He inquired.
Yes, he is in town. And his wife? Oh, she is a wifeless woman. She's now carrying on with Zinovi. She has gone quite unloose. Well, that is all right, thought Eugene. How wonderfully indifferent to it I am. How I have changed.
Oh man, let's see. Quick check of the email. Shouts out to Against the World, G. Shouts out to Don't Watch Continue in Their Mind. Shouts out to Tracy. What's up, Tracy? Oh man, I might have to get a hold of Tracy. That's what's up. Um, yes. Chapter 19. All that Eugene had wished had been realized. He had obtained the property, the factory was working successfully, the beet crops were excellent, and he expected a large income. His wife had borne a child satisfactorily, his mother-in-law had left, and he had been unanimously elected to Zemstvo. He was returning home from town after the election. He had been congratulated and had to return thanks. He had had dinner and drunk some 5 glasses of champagne. Quite new plans of life now presented himself to him. He was thinking about these as he drove home. It was an Indian summer, an excellent road and a hot sun when he approached his home. Eugene was thinking of how, as a result of his election, he would occupy among the people the position he had always dreamed of. This was to say, one in which he would be able to serve them not only by production, but which gave them employment, but also by direct influence. He imagined what his own and the other peasants would think of him in 3 years' time. For instance, this one, he thought, driving just then through the village and glancing at a peasant, who was a peasant woman, was crossing the street in front of him carrying a full water tub. They stopped to let his carriage pass. The peasant was old Peknov, and the woman was Stipendia. Eugene looked at her, recognized her, and was glad to feel that he remained quite tranquil. She was still as good-looking as ever, but this didn't touch him at all. He drove home.
Well, may I congratulate you?
Said his uncle.
Yes, I was elected. Capital, we must drink to it.
The next day, Eugene drove out to see the farming, which he had been neglecting. At the outlying farmstead, the new thrashing machine was at work. While watching it, Eugene stepped among the women, trying not to take notice of them. But try as he would, once or twice, he noticed the black eyes and red handkerchief of Stipendia, who was carrying away the straw. Once or twice he glanced sideways at her, and felt something was happening, but he could not account for it himself. Only the next day he again drove to the thrashing floor, and spent 2 hours there quite unnecessarily, without ceasing to caress his eyes the familiar handsome figure of a young woman. Did he feel that he was lost, irredeemably lost? Again those torments. Again all that horror and fear. There was no saving himself. What he expected to happen to him. That evening, the next day, without knowing how, he found himself in her backyard by her hayshed, where in the autumn they had once had a meeting. As though having a stroll, he stopped there, lighting a cigarette. The neighboring peasant woman saw him and turned back. He heard her say someone.
Go, he is waiting for you on my dying word. He is standing there. Go, you fool.
He saw how a woman, she, ran to the hayshed, but as a peasant had met him, it was no longer possible for him to turn back, so he went home. Not bad call there. Chapter 20. When entering the drawing room, everything seemed strange and unnatural to him. He had risen that morning, vigorous, determined to fling it all aside and forget it, not allow himself to think about it, without noticing how it occurred. He had all the morning not merely interested himself in the work, but tried to avoid it. who had formerly cheered him and been important, was now insignificant. Unconsciously, he tried to free himself from business. It seemed to him that he had to do so in order to think and to plan, and he freed himself and remained alone. But as soon as he was alone, he began to wander about in the garden and in the forest. All those spots were besmirched by his recollection of memories that gripped him. He felt that he was walking in the garden and pretending to himself that he was thinking out something, but that really he was not thinking about anything, but insanely, unreasonably expecting her, expecting that by some miracle she would be aware that he was expecting her and would come and at once go somewhere that no one would see them, and no one would come at night when there would be no moon, and no one, not even she herself, would see on such a night. She would come and he would touch her body. There now, thinking of breaking off when I wished, he said to himself, yes, that is having a clean, healthy woman for one's health's sake. Now, it seems one can't play with her like that. I thought I had taken her, but it was she who took me and does not let me go. Why, though I was free, that I was not free and was deceiving myself when I was married. It was all nonsense, fraud. From the time I had her experienced the new feeling, the feeling of a husband. Yes, I ought to live with her. One of two lives is possible for me. That which I began with lies of the service, the estate management, the child, and the people's respect. That is the life. It is necessary that she, Stipendia, should not be there. She must be sent away, as I said, or destroyed, so that she shall not exist. And the other life is this, for me to take her away from her husband, pay him money, disregard the shame and disgrace, and live with her. But in that case, it is necessary that Liza should not exist, nor the baby. No, that is not so. The baby does not matter, but it is necessary that there should be no Liza, that she should go away, that she should know, curse me, and go away, that she should know that I have exchanged her for a peasant woman, that I am a deceiver and a scoundrel. No, it is too terrible, it is impossible, but it might happen. He went on thinking, it might happen, and Liza might fall ill and die, and then everything would be capital. Capital, oh scoundrel! No, if someone must die, it should be the Stipendia. If she were to die, how good would that be? Yes, that is how men come to poison or kill their wives or lovers, take a revolver and go and call her, and instead of embracing her, shoot her in the breast and have done with it. Really, she is a devil, simply a devil. She has possessed herself of me against my own will. Kill, yes, there are only two ways out, to kill my wife and her, but it's impossible to live like this. At this point, there's literally two different endings, so we're gonna put them in order. Which, okay, very dope, but still. It is impossible, for I must it is impossible to live like this. It is impossible, for I must consider the matter and look ahead. If things remain as they are, what will happen? I shall again be saying to myself that I do not wish it, and that I will throw her off. But it will be merely words. In the evening I shall be at her backyard, and she will know it, and will come out. And if people know of it and tell my wife, or if I tell her myself, or I can't lie, I shall not be able to live, so I cannot. People will know. They will all know. Parasha and the blacksmith. Well, it is possible to live so. Impossible. There are only two ways out, to kill my wife or to kill her. Yes. Oh, and else. Ah, yes. There is certainly a third way. To kill myself. He said softly, and then suddenly a shudder ran over his skin. Yes, kill myself, and then I shall not need to kill them. He became frightened, for he felt that the only way it was possible. He had a revolver. Shall I really kill myself? Is it something I never thought of? How strange would it be? He returned to his study and at once opened the cupboard where the revolver lay. But Before he had taken it out of its case, his wife entered the room. Chapter 21. He again threw a newspaper over the revolver. Again with the same, she said aghast when she looked at him.
What is the same?
The same terrible expression that you had before and would not explain to me. Genya, dear one, tell me about it. I see that you are suffering. Tell me and you will feel easier. Whatever it may be, it will be better for you not to suffer so. Don't I know that it is nothing bad?
You know, while
Tell me. I won't let you go.
He smiled a piteous smile.
shall I? No, it is impossible. There is nothing to tell.
Perhaps he might have told her, but at that moment the wet nurse entered to ask if she should go for a walk. Liza went out to dress for the baby.
Then you will tell me. I will be back directly.
Yes, perhaps.
She could never forget the piteous smile with which he said this. She went out, hurriedly, stealthily, like a robber. He seized the revolver, took it out of his case. It was loaded, yes, but long ago, and one cartridge was missing.
Well, how will it be?
He said, pointing it to his temple, and hesitating a little. But as soon as he remembered Stipendia, the decision not to see her, his struggle, temptation, fall, and renewed struggle, he shuddered with horror,
No, this is better.
and he pulled the trigger. When Liza ran into the room, she had only time to step down from the balcony. He was lying face down on the floor. Black, warm blood was gushing from the wound. The corpse was twitching. There was an inquest, and no one could understand or explain the suicide. It never entered his uncle's head that the cause could be anything in common with the previous confession Eugene had made to him 2 months previously. Varvara Alexeyevna assured them that she had always foreseen it. It had been evident from his way of disputing. Neither Liza nor Mary Pavlova could at all understand why it had happened. But still they did not believe what the doctors said, namely, that he was mentally deranged, a psychopath. Wow. Fucking 1800s. They were quite unable to accept this, for they knew that he was saner than hundreds of their acquaintances. Indeed, if Eugene Inchev was mentally deranged, everyone in the same case, and the most mentally deranged people are certainly those who see in others indication of insanity that they do not notice in themselves. Then here's another ending. So, let's see, we started off back here. For it is impossible to live like this. To kill. Yes, there are only two ways out, to kill my wife or to kill her. For it is impossible to live like this, said he to himself. And going up to the table, took from it a revolver, and having examined it, took one cartridge was wanting. He put it in his trouser pocket.
My God, what am I doing?
He suddenly exclaimed, and folding his hands, he began to pray.
O God, help and deliver me. Thou knowest that I do not desire evil, but myself am powerless. Help me,
said he, making the sign of the cross out his breast before like an icon.
Yes, I cannot control myself. I will go out, walk about, and think things over.
He went to the entrance hall, put on his overcoat, and went out onto the porch. Unconsciously, his steps took him past the garden, along the field path, to the outlying farmstead. There the thrashing machine was still droning, and the cries of the driver lads were heard. He entered the barn. She was there. He saw her at once. She was raking up the corn, and on seeing, she ran briskly and merrily about with laughing eyes, raking up the scattered corn with agility. Eugene could not help watching her, but he did not wish to do so. He only recollected himself when she was no longer in sight. The clerk informed him that they were now finishing thrashing the corn that had been beaten down. That was why it was going slower, and the output was less. Eugene went up to the drum, which occasionally gave a knock as sleeves not evenly fed in past each other. And he asked the clerk if there were many such sheaves of beaten down corn.
It would be 4 cartloads of it.
Then look here, began Eugene, but he did not finish the sentence. She had gone close up to the drum and was raking corn from under it, and she scorched him with her laughing eyes. That look spoke of a merry, careless love between them, of the fact that she knew he wanted her and had come to her shed, and that she was always ready to live and be merry with him regardless of all conditions and consequences. Eugene felt himself to be in her power, but he did not wish to yield. He remembered his prayer and tried to repeat it. He began saying it to himself, but at once felt it was entirely useless. A single thought now engrossed him directly: how to arrange a meeting with her so that the others should not notice it.
If we finish this lot today, are we just start on a fresh stack or leave it till tomorrow?
Asked the clerk.
Yes, yes,
Replied Eugene, involuntarily following her to the heap which, with the other women, were raking the corn.
but can I really not master myself?
Said he to himself.
Have I really perished? Oh God, but there is no God, there is only a devil, and it is she. She has possessed me, but I won't. The devil, yes, a devil.
Again he went up to her, drew a revolver from his pocket, shot her once, twice, 3 times in the back. She ran a few steps and fell on a heap of corn.
Oh my God, what was that?
Cried the woman.
No, it was not an accident. I killed her on purpose, cried Eugene. Send for the police officer.
He went home and went to his study and locked himself in without speaking to his wife.
Do not come to me, he cried through the door. You will know all about it.
An hour later he rang and bade the manservant who answered the bell.
Go find out whether Stipendia is alive.
The servant already knew about it and told him she had died an hour ago.
Well, all right. Now leave me alone. When the police officer or the magistrate comes, let me know.
The police officer and magistrate arrived the next morning, and Eugene, having bidden his wife baby farewell, was taken to prison. He was tried. It was during the early days of the trial by July, and the verdict was one of temporary insanity, and he was sentenced only to perform a church penance. He had been kept in prison for 9 months, and was then confined to be in a monastery for a month. He had begun to drink while still in prison, continued to do so in the monastery, and returned home an enfeebled, irresponsible drunkard. Varya Alexeyevna assured them that she had always predicted this. It was, she said, evident from the way he disputed. Neither Liza nor Mary Pavlovna could understand how the affair had happened, but for all that they did not believe what the doctor said, namely that he was a mentally deranged psychopath. They could not accept that, for they knew that he was saner than hundreds of their acquaintances. And indeed, if Eugene Inteyev was mentally deranged when he committed his crime, then everyone was similarly insane. The most mentally deranged people are certainly those who see in others indications of insanity they do not notice in themselves. Wow. That's why Tolstoy is the best writer of all time. Right there. Shit. Whew, both of those endings hit. Oh god, both of those endings. Wowzers. That's all I can do for now. I gotta still run and do some errands today. Never got my email, but really hope I can hear from these folks soon. It's such an awesome company. But thank you so much to everyone who showed up today. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. That was Leo Tolstoy's The Devil. And just need a minute to process, I guess. Yeah. Look out for some Joe Biden content tonight. It's going to be awesome. Hope you have a wonderful evening. One love, full faith, NFA gang, we out.